So today is my 44th birthday. Aw, Abby, are you trying to wish me a happy birthday, girl? And in honor of my 44th birthday, I actually wanted to make a video where I broke down like the 22 different things that I've learned in my 22 years of adulthood. Just sort of try to pass down some information and knowledge to the next generation. But then I decided against that idea because I realized that it is in fact a terrible idea because the world is littered with far too many old men giving advice on the internet.
What advice would you give to a young 20-year-old, 16-year-old, 15-year-old?
Good morning. Whoops, it's raining. Hold on a minute.
By the time this video is over, it will be confirmed that you are on your own.
And you should be responsible for and productive for as many people as you can manage.
The trash heap that this country is turned into by design.
If you don't have your money right, if you're not thinking about money correctly, you're never going to make a sale.
We are in control of our own destiny.
You have to find your game.
You will not be the man that you want to be until you grow into it.
That's a dumb move. Don't do dumb moves with money.
The big mistake I see young people make is they focus here. And the words are, I want to do what I love.
All you have to focus on in your life is find a way to add more value than anybody else does, and you'll never have to worry about anything.
Hey, look! An old man about to give advice on why old people giving advice is bad. How meta can you get?
Now, the reasonable question you guys might be asking is, Morgan, why do you do it? Why do you old men feel the need to tell us younger folks how to live our lives? And well, the short answer is we really do just want to be helpful. But the longer and more complicated answer is that we still think the world is the way it was when we were 25 years old.
And more likely than not, they probably want to make some money off of you.
The truth of the matter is, at this point in our society, intergenerational conflict is at the highest point it's been in decades. In fact, just the other day, I was reading this research paper entitled Millennials versus Boomers, an asymmetric pattern of realistic and symbolic threats drive intergenerational tensions in the United States. Catchy title, right? But this study was actually conducted in the last couple of years, and it has I think 1,700 participants. And what the study found that was really interesting is that yes, baby boomers and millennials are most definitely at each other's throats, but even more interestingly, it's for different reasons. You see, the baby boomers are not a big fan of the millennials because the baby boomers feel like the millennials are threatening a traditional way of existence.
Apparently, millennials and Gen Z have a much different view of the American dream than past generations. But I'm sorry, if you only want to work 4 hours, it's going to be harder for you to get a house.
We expected nothing, so everything we got was a bonus. Millennials expect everything, so everything is a disappointment.
While meanwhile, the millennials are not big fans of the boomers right now because they feel like the boomers are costing them opportunity.
Narcissistic baby boomers, the most greedy, most selfish generation that has ever existed. No other generation has done more damage than the baby boomers.
Okay, boomer, okay, boomer, okay, boomer, okay, boomer.
But also, when you look at a lot of the critiques of advice given by baby boomers to folks who are either millennials or in Gen Z, what you're going to find is that scenario is playing out on that front as well.
Today's generation is so entitled. Nobody helped me pay for college. I had to pay that $200 right out of my pocket.
Hi, it's me, a child from a boomer comic. Teacher, you got my pronouns wrong. They're Pokemon/Go. Where's the screen on this crummy thing?
Listen, son, you shouldn't be so entitled. Life isn't fair. Where's my ranch?
All fathers essentially dress in the clothing style of the last good year of their life. It's usually around the time they got married. They will just freeze that moment in fashion history and then ride it out to the end.
Why do old people's worldviews stay locked in place to where they were at when they were 25 years old? Allow me to explain. Imagine your mind is like a sponge, soaking up everything around you. By the time you turn 13 years old, this sponge has absorbed a lot of ideas and beliefs, and it's really starting to take shape on how you see the world. Scientists have found that this is a really key time, and this is when your worldview really starts to take shape. But even though your worldview starts to get firm around the age of 13, your brain's still changing and it's still growing. In fact, your brain keeps developing all the way until you're about 25 years old. This means that while you're a teenager and even after, your brain's still learning and adapting, and some of your first experiences with the world as an independent person really take place, and those initial experiences are extremely formative in your worldview. And because your brain is still developing from ages 13 to 25, these years are super important. They help decide not just how you see the world, they also are going to shape how you see the world when you get older. It's like setting the foundation for a house. Once the foundation's set, the rest of the house is built on top of it. Your teenage years and a little bit beyond are building that foundation for how you understand everything, and it really does keep you anchored. Anchoring is a cognitive bias that describes the human tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered. Once an anchor is set, subsequent judgments are made by adjusting away from that anchor, and there's a bias towards interpreting other information around that anchor. For example, let's say that you're told that a shirt costs $100. That price becomes the anchor. If you later see that same shirt on sale for $70, you might perceive it as a good deal because the anchored price was $100. That anchored price influences your judgment. And even though the shirt's value hasn't changed 1 penny, your perception of its value has been influenced by the initial price you were exposed to.
By the way, that t-shirt's available for the low price of $20 at goldshawfarm.com. Isn't it a great deal?
Anchoring plays a significant role not just in shopping and financial decisions, but it also affects how we assess probabilities, make estimates, form impressions, have biases. It shows how initial information, even if it's irrelevant, can significantly impact how we perceive the world. When you hit 25 years old, something interesting happens. Your perception of the world, like where you stand and what you believe, it gets anchored. This means that by the time you're 25, how you see the world has a strong base, much like a tree that's firmly rooted in the ground. And that's why extremely frequently, any advice an older person will give a younger person is going to be rooted in assumptions that were true when that older person was 25.
My advice to you is to do what your parents did. Get a job, sir. The bums will always lose. Do you hear me, Lebowski?
And to me, that makes a lot of sense, particularly when I think about my own self and my own advice that I would have offered up to folks. Not to say that I didn't get any smarter from my experiences, not to say that the experiences I had after that point in age didn't further shape me. But again, when I close my eyes and think of myself, I think of myself when I was 25 years old. And when I open those eyes and I look at the mirror, I am absolutely horrified by the old man I have become.
What the f?
So one of my best friends, and he's been one of my best friends since, I don't know, we were like 9 years old or so. His birthday is 5 days after my birthday, so we're essentially almost exactly the same age. And we have oftentimes had these ongoing text strings that go back and forth where we share different things that mark our age. For example, we're both huge baseball fans, and we've been baseball fans and baseball card collectors since we were little kids. And it used to be when we were in our 20s, when some baseball player who was really prominent when we were kids retired, we would text that back and forth and marvel at, wow, it just seems like that guy was in his prime and now here he is, an old man retiring. And then as we got into our 30s, we started to notice more and more that all of the baseball players were getting younger than we were. And oftentimes it was becoming a rarity for a guy who was actually older than we were to retire. And so we would usually mark that person's retirement with a text message. But now at this point, there isn't a single active Major League Baseball player who is older than we are. In fact, that has been the case since Albert Pujols retired 2 years ago. And so the idea that we're starting another baseball season and really only Rich Hill is close to us in age, because I think he's actually like 1 day younger than my friend, it just goes to show you how quickly time marches on, despite the fact that at this point, I still dream of maybe one day being the third baseman for the Boston Red Sox. But to be quite honest, my arm is not the whip that it used to be, and I probably struggle to make that throw from third to first, let alone even try to hit a major league fastball at this point. But there is this one tiny sliver inside my brain that for whatever reason, because of my self-perception and sense of self, I believe it's still possible. And I know with certainty I can't be the only old man who thinks that. Like seriously, how does this crap happen so gosh darn fast? And I know that there are younger viewers of this video watching it right now and saying,
oh my gosh, Morgan's lost it. He's just an old man muttering about how old he is.
But as an example of an old man giving bad advice to younger people, let me just tell you, it will happen to you too. And I remember being your age and people telling me that that was going to happen to me, and I completely didn't believe them. You are going to get old. All of us, everybody. It's an inevitability. If you're going to continue to exist on this planet, you will continue to age. And as you age, new folks come up behind you, and your life and your role on this planet starts to shift and change and evolve. And I would argue that if you don't recognize and appreciate that cycle and participate in that cycle willingly, the generations that are behind you are going to resent you for it. I'm prepping pizza dough for dinner tonight. So when you play a game like tic-tac-toe and the same person always gets to go first, what you're gonna find is over and over and over again, as in tic-tac-toe, there's always a first mover advantage. And so when you see younger generations getting frustrated with the older generations, particularly in this day and age, I think that's a big part of our problem. And so what you have is the same people taking their turn first over and over again, and they continue to win.
We're going to keep winning and winning and winning.
And that winning comes at the cost of the folks who aren't able to go first.
Oh, I see what you're doing there, kid. You're going to try to blame everything on the baby boomers. Everybody always tries to blame everything on the baby boomers.
Now, it's true that intergenerational conflict has existed, gosh, I don't know, long before people were people and probably back to some evolutionary ancestors. But with boomers, they are a little bit unique. You know, it's an interesting twist of fate that millennials and Gen Z are often branded as self-centered by baby boomers. This critique really has a lot of irony considering that it was Tom Wolfe, a member of the silent generation, who famously dubbed the me decade and baby boomers the me generation. This label was meant to capture the baby boomers' shift towards self-actualization and individualism, a real stark departure from the ethos of their predecessors. The silent generation, those who grew up during the immediate aftermath of the Great Depression, was characterized by sacrifice and resilience. The harsh realities of the Depression instilled in them the values of hard work, frugality, and the importance of community and family ties.
As I'm editing this video, I'm realizing I'm making a lot of sweeping generalizations about different generations, and please know that there's always unique individuals within each generational cohort, but to talk about them in terms of an impact on a society and to talk about them in mass, I do have to make those sweeping generalizations. That said, obviously each person is their own unique special snowflake.
Now, in aggregate, it's said that these experiences taught them to save diligently, cherish what they had, and prioritize collective well-being over individual desires. In contrast, the baby boomers, coming of age in a post-war era of prosperity and possibility, turned inward, focusing more on personal fulfillment and self-actualization than any generation before them. Now, a lot of folks will say that this shift marked a significant cultural transformation, where the lessons of deprivation and communal effort seen in the silent generation gave way to a more individualistic and self-focused worldview seen among baby boomers. And I know it's a common trope for older generations to critique the ones that follow, but the boomers' journey into their later years has been marked by a continued focus on the self. This was less pronounced in previous generations. If you need evidence, Look at the current economic picture.
That's unfair. What would suggest we boomers were ever selfish? We protested the Vietnam War. We supported the civil rights movement. We made ecological concerns a real thing.
You boomers rigged the game in favor of yourselves.
You probably heard how everything from the economy to the housing crisis all feels like it's rigged. Well, it is, but not in some sort of crazy conspiracy theory kind of way. It's all out there in the open. Over the last 40 years, the big tax breaks have been for things like mortgage interest and capital gains. Guess who benefits from those things? Older generations who've already got their homes and their investment situation sorted out. Meanwhile, younger folks are hustling in the gig economy, paying rent, and trying to make ends meet in a service-oriented economy that no longer makes stuff. And let's talk about getting ahead. You know how crucial education is, right? But the cost of college has shot up at such insane rates over the past 40 years that it no longer makes sense to go to college, and student debt has become one of the fastest growing types of debt over the last 40 years as well. Meanwhile, wages for new workers have not even come close to keeping pace with those skyrocketing education costs. It's like the system's set up to make it harder right from the start. And then there's the whole housing mess. It's tougher and pricier to find a place now because of NIMBY-style attitudes. Basically, once somebody's got theirs, whether it's a degree or a house or a successful business, they pull up the ladder behind them. They push for rules that make it harder to build new homes or harder to start businesses, and all it does is keep their own assets even more valuable. I also think there's a real irony in the fact that the demographic most likely to oppose a single-payer healthcare system are also the same folks who are most likely to have their healthcare paid for by the government. So it's not just a string of bad luck. It's a system that has been nudged over the years to protect specific interests at the expense of other younger folks. From tax loopholes to skyrocketing college fees and beyond, it's like there's a giant keep out sign on the road to prosperity. That's not just frustrating, it's unfair. And that breeds contempt. Now, for folks who have been watching my videos for a long time, you are probably well aware that I'm a huge fan of storytelling and the practice and art of storytelling, the science and thinking that goes into it. And one of the foundational fathers of storytelling theory is Joseph Campbell. Now, I cite that name fully recognizing that that man has his flaws and drawbacks. But there were a lot of interesting things in his teachings, and particularly this concept of the hero's journey and how that pattern seems to play itself out over and over and over again in human narrative history. You start off with the hero who is called to adventure. The hero resists the call to adventure, but eventually they cross the threshold and they're on their way to adventure. They meet a guide who equips them with the tools that they need. They meet a series of challenges. Those challenges test and push. There's failure, there's struggle along the way. But eventually the hero gets to the place of knowledge and wisdom and betterment, and that is ultimately how they succeed on their quest. And all you have to do is look at popular culture, and you're going to see that this pattern plays out over and over and over again.
A stereotype is an archetype with no sense of fashion.
In fact, when stories don't follow this pattern, people often find those stories unsatisfying, and they're going to tell you that they have a bad ending. And so as a storytelling principle, the hero's journey is a wonderful tool, but as a pattern for life advice, it can often be terrible. And one of the patterns that I often see when I see advice coming from older folks to younger folks is that that advice is often structured in a way where it follows the hero's journey.
Good morning, future leaders. I'm here to tell you how to truly succeed, just as I did when I was your age, navigating the world of 1982 with nothing but grit and a typewriter. Let me share my story. I once landed a big client, not with emails or social media, but with persistence and a firm handshake. Drove 2 hours just to meet him. That's right. We didn't hide behind screens. We made real human connections, eyeball to eyeball. Do that, And maybe you too one day will be telling your story of success. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I'm Gen Alpha, and I'm here to kill you.
In the story, the person who's offering advice is the character who's positioned as the hero, which for anybody listening to that advice and hoping to take it as a template for themselves, they're going to find that it doesn't speak to them and doesn't match.
One of my favorite things that boomers do is when they tell you, you're like, millennials and Gen Z, they don't have the work ethic that we had. We would go to our jobs for 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I would work that job. And you're like, just one job? All of your financial needs were met through one employer?
And that's because most older advice givers struggle with the idea that they are no longer the hero of their story and they now need to play the role of the mentor. And it's really only now, as I'm in my 40s, I'm realizing that that's a real pisser to have to accept that fact. Because you want to be Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter. You don't want to be Obi-Wan or Dumbledore. But the truth of the matter is, eventually all heroes have to become the mentor to help the next generation of heroes come into their own. Look, we can all have our misgivings about the last 3 Star Wars movies, but one of the few things that I think they did very much right is they made Luke Skywalker play the mentor role, and he stepped aside at the end of the second movie to make way for the new hero. And while so many Star Wars fanboys who are close to my age were irate by this fact, that's the right thing to do. And really shame on the folks of my generation who struggle with accepting the fact that it is time for another generation to step forward.
And yes, that scenario plays itself out in situations that are far more significant and impactful than just popular culture.
Both candidates are older than the average U.S. life expectancy.
You know, one of my favorite book series is of all time, Stephen King's Dark Tower series, you know, the kind of the Roll in the Last Gunslinger stories. You know, all told across that series, Stephen King wrote like 4,250 pages. And one of the more important and interesting themes that occurs across those books is this idea that the world has moved on.
The world has moved on, we say. We've always said, but it's moving on faster now. Something has happened to time.
Technology's broken down, organized religion has fallen apart, cities have crumbled, and the heroes, the gunslingers, all but Roland, have gone away. And our characters are left to kind of wander through these worlds that showcase this idea that the world has moved on. Oh, Discordia. And even after the efforts of our heroes, you realize that that is just what it is and that the world has moved on. But without ruining the entire book series for you guys, and I totally think it's worth reading, so you should check it out, there is this concept introduced in that book about Ka, which is like, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's like kind of the life force that drives everything and really guides fate and destiny.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
Wrong sci-fi series.
Ka is a wheel. Its one purpose is to turn. The spin of Ka always brings us back to the same place, to face and reface our mistakes and defeats until we can learn from them. When we learn from the past, the wheel continues to move forward towards growth and evolution. When we don't, the wheel spins backward and we are given another chance. If once more we squander the opportunity, the wheel continues its rotation towards de-evolution or destruction.
Well, in the books, they're often saying that Ka is a wheel and that things that go around will come around and it's all a cycle and things are destined to repeat. And that's an idea and theme that plays itself out over and over and over again throughout those books. And what I realize now at the age of 44 is that it's so universally true to life itself. Like I said, life is this constant cycle of creation and destruction, and you can't have one without the other. And if you don't let one give way to the other, things become stale and stagnant and sad. Which is why so frequently these days, advice coming from old people, and old men in particular, is also so stale and sad.
I don't agree with Dave Ramsey's advice, which would make you wrong. And I know you're writing a blog from your mother's basement and you're looking for clickbait using my name. I understand that. That's humorous because it's stupid.
And it comes at a time when younger generations so badly need that help, need that guidance, need that advice. But if we're all out there constantly thinking that the world is the way it was when we were 25 and that the advice and things that we learned because it worked for us are going to apply to them.
If you do these 5 things from the Bible and from your grandmother,
we're going to consistently be missing the mark in how to help others. I actually have started to come to think about life as being a song.
There's a song we're singing. Why don't you?
And even though I have like zero musical talent personally, because one of the things that I've observed is that the structure of life, both our lives individually as well as our lives collectively, really does follow various patterns. And while those patterns can change and shift and be different, there are some similarities that you will see over and over again. And particularly when we each look back and look at our own lives, they are their own unique song. And within each song, it has its own rhythm and structure. You know, when you're a kid, the song's first starting and you're not quite sure what to make of the introduction. And then as you go from being a teenager to an adult, you might be just experiencing those first couple of verses. Usually by the time you're in your 20s, you're starting to hear the first chorus. But by the time you get to your 40s, you've heard the first chorus, you've heard the second verse, you might have even gotten to the second chorus at that point. And so you're starting to see the pattern and you're starting to realize how the song has gone. And you're also coming to terms with the fact that you might be at the halfway point of the song. And mind you, there is no guarantee in that, and you might actually be very close to the end, and your song might end much shorter than you think, like some sort of punk rock song. But if you're going to be a reasonable optimist, it is still fair to say that you're at the halfway point of the song. And you also realize it's your responsibility to think very carefully how you want your song to end and how to end your song on the right way. You know, rock and roll history is littered with songs that started out great and just end like garbage. And I highly doubt that anybody wants their life to follow a similar pattern. And so I personally lately have been thinking very much about the rest of my song and how I want it to go, and realize that since I'm the one who's both writing the music and performing it while it's going on, I really better get my act together and finish the second half of this song strong. And so yes, these have been the things I've been thinking about lately as I approach my 44th birthday. Now, as I was prepping and planning for this video, I was talking to a younger friend of mine, and they did say to me, though, that they were curious about my 22 things that I've learned in adulthood, and they really wanted to know what they were and whether or not they could take advantage of them. And since I did end up making that list, I'm not going to bloviate here, but I will give you the quick rundown.
So after a 30-minute lecture on why old people giving advice is a bad idea, you're going to ignore all of your previous advice and do the exact same thing? Oh boy, I cannot wait for this list.
Number 1, time moves fast and it gets exponentially faster. Number 2, know the difference between what you control and what you don't. Basically the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer.
Serenity now! Serenity now!
Number 3, you don't have to do what's expected. Expectations are the shadows we chase, cast by bright lights of societal norms and the personal lanterns we carry on our journey. They aren't actually real. 4, shame is a terrorist. 5, don't get too angry. 6, feel your feelings. 6 might seem like it contradicts 5, but they actually are complementary. 7, it's never too late to change. 8, keep doing new things. 9, comfort will kill you, which, as I sit here by a warm fire with a happy kitty cat and some pizza dough rising, I recognize I'm at risk of right now. 10, get used to failure. 11, choose humility over pride. 12, always try to start good habits. It's always a little rough at first, but in a few years, it will become second nature. 13 is a reminder to stretch. Literally, physically stretch. Stretching is important. The older you get, the more rigid you get, so don't neglect stretching. 14, get comfortable with being wrong. 15, go to therapy. 16, get sunshine. And 17 is that you should interact with animals, which I highly endorse and have pretty much built my life around at this point. 18, pay attention to the natural world. 19, everything is an ecosystem and it's connected. Ka is a wheel, my friends. 20, Try to make the world a better place. 21. The older you get, the more you are at risk of slipping into your own world and not participating enough in the broader world around you. Yeah, that one just always feels very depressingly dark to me, but also oftentimes very true. And then number 22 of the 22 things that I've learned since becoming an adult, since I was 22, because I feel like, you know, your college years, you're not exactly an adult, but by the time I was 22, I was an adult. Number 22 is floss and brush your teeth, because that stuff's important, and poor dental care will come back to haunt you. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Stories told with Morgan Gold. With Morgan Gold, it's time for Stories Told.